Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for a presentation on the best practices for backing up Microsoft applications. As general housekeeping rules, all phone lines will be muted for the duration of the presentation, and we will be taking questions through the Q&A box. We will be sending out a copy of the presentation after the webinar. Okay, today we will be reviewing what Microsoft applications are, the best practices for backing up Microsoft applications, why the cloud backup is a smarter choice, and how exactly the cloud supports Microsoft application backup. Our presenter today is going to be John McGuire. He's the Director of Sales and Marketing here at VaultLogix. John has been with VaultLogix for 8 years and brings over 15 years of backup and storage industry experience with him. So without further ado, I give you John.
Thanks, Melanie, and thanks for everyone for taking the time today to join us on this webinar. So as Melanie pointed out, we wanted to talk about, specifically talking about Microsoft applications. And of course, depending on your role, you may have a different knowledge or even exposure to different specific Microsoft applications. But seeing how it's the most predominant application operating system out there, it's a great rule to come across and present this to you. So there's two different systems here we're talking about. We're talking about the everyday, your typical Microsoft Office suite, which is made up of your Excel, your Word documents, your PowerPoint. Excel can be done in accounting where people are working with a lot of spreadsheets, PowerPoints and Word, done in sales, and of course, I'm sure everybody is familiar with Outlook, which is actually the vessel in which people handle their email. As we talk from every day, we move over to business critical. And what the important piece of this and what this is, our presentation today is geared towards, is talking about the applications that are critical for everyday business. The four ones we're going to be discussing today is, of course, is Microsoft Exchange, which is email, Microsoft Hyper-V, which is Microsoft's virtual application, Microsoft SharePoint, which is made up of, is a portal that's made up of a different dynamics. And then lastly, there's Microsoft SQL, and we're gearing it towards the Microsoft Dynamics suite, which we'll get into later.
Great, and at this point in time, we'd like to launch a quick poll question, which is, which Microsoft applications do you find the most challenging to back up and restore? And we will give you guys a moment here to answer the question. It looks like SQL and Exchange are fighting it out for the hardest to back up and restore as of right now. All right, it looks like all of our answers are in or almost in. I'll give it another second here. All right.
So how do we look, Melanie?
So it looks like 47% find that Exchange is the hardest to back up and restore. 21% find SharePoint the hardest to back up and restore. 5% for Hyper-V, and 26% for SQL.
Interesting, and as you can see, this next slide here actually talks about, this was a poll that was done with our current customers back in 2012. And we talked a little bit about the same type of technology that we were doing and did this poll, and it looks like the numbers are kind of similar, so things haven't changed a lot. The one thing that I do find interesting in being, from my experience, as Melanie said, of 15 plus years of backup and storage, is the one issue that's always been a problem has always been email, especially Microsoft Exchange. Mainly I think because of the structure and how it's built, and of course the size. People are sending more emails. Email is now more of a business application that everybody's using. So I can see where that's coming into play. But what's really interesting is seeing the adoption of new applications that are coming into play, very similar to that of what we did today. But you're looking at Microsoft SharePoint as well as Microsoft Hyper-V. coming in as new applications, and it's just experience and trying to understand what are the best practices, how do we handle this, and making sure that we have specific applications from a backup standpoint to help recover those. Not a surprise is Microsoft down towards the end. And really looking at it, as you talk about SQLs, the SQL has been out for so long, it is a database. There's a lot of rules and procedures and roles that are put around how to protect Microsoft SQL. And I can see why that's not as big of a concern, even though it is a major application. But we'll get into some of these as we move forward. So what I wanted to touch base before we started getting into some of the applications is really start talking about what are some of the best practices in regards to backup. Not just about Microsoft applications, but backing up in general. Of course, first, ensure that your data is saved at an off-site location. And the point of that is making sure that it's away from not only the server or where the data resides, but making sure it's away from the office in case of a catastrophic event. Number two, make sure you identify what data types and how quickly they need to be restored. The key to this is that all data is not equally important, and it really also depends on who you're talking to. There could be an admin who, Word documents that are being saved and being done might not be as critical as the Excel spreadsheet for the CFO that he manages accounting on. So the key is also identifying that as well. Also, taking that a step further is really determining the retention policies. And that can be done not just at a corporate level, it could be done at an application level as well. Also, part of this could be driving it is also compliancy. Could it be, financial, healthcare could be pushing that to require that the hold on to information for a certain amount of time, but also could be done from a business internal requirement that could be pushed down through the CFO or other executives requiring certain information to be held on for a certain amount of time. And then lastly is really understanding the priority of the individual applications. And when you start looking into this, it's really talking about productivity. It's talking about, is it billing, making sure that you can bill your customers and we're collecting and receiving money. Is it the CRM that is driving sales and revenue, pushing things forward? Or like I mentioned earlier, could it be email? Is that everything that's done through the company is so important that email is so critical? But really determining which one in the list of priorities for these as well. So, now that we've figured out, what the best practices are, let's look at how we handle specific applications and platforms. So, number one, as what seemed to be the most difficult one to back up that we had mentioned in the polls from last year as well as today, is Exchange Server, so your email. Of course, what this does is, as most of us should know, provides email, but also does, your calendar, your contact, also tasks for individual users. It has turned into more of a business type applications. But of course, lost or corrupt data could cause financial and legal issues. We've seen this that where, correspondence through emails can cause this problem, but also can take it a step further, can cause a reputation problem, meaning if it gets out that you've lost this, could hurt financially as well. But getting into part of how we handle Exchange, or how most people handle Exchange, is that Exchange is broken up into multiple different parts. Number one, of course, there's the information store. They call that the database level. Number two, there's the individual mailboxes. And lastly, there's, of course, breaking that down even more specific, which could be the message level, the calendars and the contacts that are available. The key to this is all important. But what Microsoft deems is the most important and recommends highly is to make sure that you back up the information store completely and making sure that gets off-site. Yes, having the ability to restore a single email or someone's mailbox is helpful, and especially from a time constraint. But really the key point is making sure that if anything happens to the database, corruption, viruses, or a failure, being able to restore the entire database or the entire information store is what is truly recommended by Microsoft. So as we move into some of the other Microsoft applications, Microsoft SharePoint, again, it's gaining market share in the small to medium-sized business. We're seeing more and more customers asking about how we handle that. And we're seeing it just more in the industry out there, that more people are adopting this. Well, what really is Microsoft SharePoint? Of course, it's a web application, but it's also really a business portal that's been created by Microsoft to really help drive business processes through that, internet portals that are here, content management, collaboration, but really being able to pull everything together so everyone has one place to go for these business processes. So again, talking about what does Microsoft recommend? Basically they're saying to back up the entire database. There is a SQL database there, but treat it like that. Back up the database, back up all the components that are inside that. Because the idea that when you are doing a restore, you might not need to restore the entire SharePoint version. There are cases where you might need to restore the different components that make up that. It could be one of the internet portals. It could be the content or the collaboration piece. Or it could be the entire database that needs to be restored. So that's what Microsoft recommends. Again, moving over to another application that seems to be creeping its way up into the SMB space, in a lot of different places is virtualization. So virtualizing servers, so reducing the footprint of the actual physical server and creating it into more virtual servers, where before it was mostly at the enterprise level with the VMwares and everybody else, where Microsoft has come down and made it now more affordable in the SMB part. So of course the hypervisor-based system for Microsoft Windows makes up the Hyper-V. But what they're telling you to do is basically to back up the entire virtual server. So of course there's the guest system and application, but also making sure you handle the server setting and preferences. A lot of that can be done through things like system state and other type backups. But with Microsoft developing a lot of their information and code base into the system state, the recommended way to do is, yes, back up the system state, but then treat every virtual server as if it was a physical server and back them up as well. So what you're doing there is you're making sure that if something was to happen from a virtual server standpoint, you were able to restore that virtual server back. And if it was in case the actual physical server was to go down, you could actually also restore the system state and then back up to restore all the virtual servers as well. So, as we move down the line, we talked about SQL, where people said, well, what isn't it difficult to back up? And again, SQL has been around for a long time. It's an extremely stable database these days. It's used in ERPs. It's used in running specific applications. And really pushing this forward is that the SQL really is the engine that drives most applications. So when looking at, we wanted to tie in towards Microsoft Dynamics. So Dynamics, of course, their suite of products that everything runs off of SQL. Some of the people that might not be aware of them is through acquisitions, they have their own application that they now call their different suite inside them as well. So there's, Dynamics GP, which is Great Plains. There's Navision, Solomon. These were acquisitions that were done that are now pulled in and put up to the actual Microsoft Dynamics suite. You could actually add CRM in there as well. So when looking at any type of applications running in this suite or running on anything on SQL, well, Microsoft actually recommends backing up the actual SQL database in its entirety. The key to this is also not backing up a backup file, not backing up a dump file, but having the ability to actually back up the database as itself. So to talk a little bit more about Microsoft Dynamics, many suites in this product line, as we mentioned, but really what this is it's really an ERP solution. It's really the livelihood that's running a lot of businesses. Like I said, here at VaultLogix, we run Great Plains, and from an accounting standpoint, it does a lot from what we need to do on a daily basis. But also taken to the second level too is their CRM solution as well. So the customer relation management software that actually helps drive revenue, sales, and marketing, and everything needs to be done. So it really is truly an ERP type solution. As it says here, it is designed for the SMBs, but it is running in a lot of different enterprise type level companies. And the key to this is following the instructions of what's required by Microsoft and their application. So as it mentions here, it says each application does store its data in various different places. In most cases, they will not only back up the database, but clearly making sure that you back up the folders and the files that are required to make sure that if in case of a disaster, in case of a restore, you can get everything back up and running. And in most cases, that's in the information in the software that they give you. And then lastly, the need to back up the ecosystem, not just the data. As I mentioned, it's really talking about all the folders and features that's part of the actual software that doesn't include the unique data that has been created by the company.
All right, and at this point in time, we'd like to take a moment to launch another poll. We're curious to know what type of backup you're currently using when you back up your Microsoft applications. So we have a lot of people voting in right now. It looks like we have a lot of tape backup and cloud backup going on right now. I'll just give this another couple of seconds here for some last-minute votes to come in. All right. So it looks like we have about 35% of the people on the call right now are using the cloud, and about 45% are using tape. And the rest of the percentage is split between replication and being unsure of what they're using.
Okay, great. Well, I think that might help with my presentation on the next slide, talking about why backup to the cloud then. What's interesting, again, being here at VaultLogix for over 8 years has really been the cloud adoption and where it's come from. And, back when we started out, VaultLogix has been around since about 2002. Back then they didn't call it the cloud. We literally called it online backup, and there weren't a lot of people doing it. And the marketing spin and things that have gone on is naming it called the cloud. I really brought a lot of different vendors into play, and I'll kind of get into that a little bit later. But what I wanted to talk about is kind of really why the cloud, between replication and tape and anything else that you're doing. For those of you who aren't doing the cloud and really understand what's the value, what's the importance. Well, the key to the cloud is kind of what we talked about, some of the benefits, or really the best practices, is really making sure your data gets off-site. Because, what doesn't happen is, backing up to disk or doing replication or even doing a disk to tape or something else like that, sometimes it doesn't help when it comes to, a regional problem, meaning hardware failure. Could be, the sprinklers go off in the data center, theft, viruses, other things like that. The nice thing about the cloud is it gets it off-site immediately and gets it up there so you can have it available. Number two, it really is cost effective. And how we justify that it depends on where you are in your backup procedure. But really, when you look at the cloud, you don't need to buy new hardware. There's no new software to buy. There's no more software and maintenance monthly contracts and things you need to handle. On top of that, there's also the manpower, right? Someone does need to make sure that they're swapping the tapes and cleaning the drives and doing everything they need to do to make sure everything's up and working. And then add on top of that, every year or throughout the year, there's going to be replacement costs. So, it is cost effective. And it's easy and automated. Not only as it says here, being able to do a quick file to recover data, but it's that automated. You can search and choose and pick. It's not like in the tape backup where it's linear, where you need to go and search on the tape to find out where that file is on the tape to be able to restore. Everything is disk-based. It's a search and click and restore that data as well. It's reliable and redundant. It says here, augment the local backup. It could be. It could be an augment to your tape. It could be an augment to your replication. It could be an augment to whatever it is that you're doing today. But what it's giving you a secondary or maybe even a tertiary backup while getting it offsite instantly. But the nice thing about it is, depending on who you look at it from a provider standpoint, you're actually sending it up to, typically to might be a better service than what you're doing today. In most cases, if you're looking at a true business class provider, you're backing it up to enterprise class infrastructure that's redundant, that's available at all times. And then lastly, when you're using the cloud, you're really outsourcing that to the experts. So you're outsourcing your backup, you're outsourcing your disaster recovery. So these are some of the key benefits to talking about why should I look at the cloud, or why should I add additional to what I'm doing today to the cloud. So looking at a quick, understanding of what is cloud backup and kind of how it works. There's multiple different ways. There's multiple different pieces of data protection that every customer may need. In some cases, people here, they might only have one location. They need to back up their corporate data. Well, the cloud is great for that corporate solution. There could be something where you have a lot of distributed data. You could have branch offices. You could have teleworkers or mobile users. And really the ability to maybe make sure that you can corral those in, the data that's out on the edge that you don't have control over. So a lot of these key features is really, the cloud helps benefit, helps handle that as well. And if you look at this from a whole, depending on, no matter where you are, whether it be the mobile user, the branch office, or even the corporate office, but what it's doing from a cloud standpoint is really taking your data, you're deciding what data it is you want to back up, what time do you want to back up, and how long do you want to hold on to it for? So that key metrics that we talked about between importance of data and retention of data. But really, that's the ability. The data sent, compressed and encrypted, it's sent offsite to a data vault, and then hopefully replicated to a secondary facility if the provider has that as well. So, as we're getting into, data recovery, and a lot of times in this industry that we talk about is, we do talk about recovery time, but a lot of times we're talking about online backup and backing it up and getting it back up there and making sure it's offsite. But really a lot of things we don't talk about is getting it back. And the key to it is that not having to, the time that you need to test it shouldn't be the time when you have the disaster. So as you can see here, the average downtime per event, well, people that utilize cloud storage, they're down for just over 2 hours. Well, people that aren't, you're talking about 8 hours, depending on what time of day that is. That could leak over to the second day. But really, what's scary enough is that you see some of the pie charts here talks about 24 hours or multiple days. Well, what does that cost? How much does that cost of downtime? Whether it be productivity in your employees, could it be billing, could it be receiving, could it be inventory? But whatever it may be, it could be a significant revenue loss, or could put you out of business. So you can see where adding a little bit of additional bonus of using the cloud can help with that recovery. So kind of winding it back down to, or back around to Microsoft, is talking about, how does the cloud support these Microsoft backups? Well, number one, it does provide brick-level backups and restores for Microsoft applications. And the example here is SharePoint, so you could restore everything, or you could go to websites or lists of documents. But as it goes a little further down too, it talks about Exchange. Well, it could be brick level as well. If you really needed to, you could do a mailbox. You could do a message that might be needed. Also, the nice thing about the cloud is it can recognize virtual machines as individual servers. It doesn't really care if it's a virtual machine or a physical machine. So the benefit there is being able to roll those out in those scenarios. I did mention the Exchange. Can be, you can back up, as we mentioned, the recommended ways to back up the information store. However, we could restore the individual mailboxes or the messages. And then lastly, which is kind of key and important here, is the ability to restore back to the original instance. The example is done here for SQL Dynamics is, in a lot of cases, it might not be a complete, the machine might not be completely down, or it could be a corruption in the database, or needing to restore back to a previous version for something that needs to be accessed. Well, the nice thing about the cloud, it doesn't care if it goes back to the same location or an alternate location, and that flexibility is nice, where unlike other applications, be it tape or replication, it might require an agent or something else to be loaded or something else to be put in the domain to be able to handle that, where cloud can get by that for a faster ability to restore. So tying this down to the end, of course, is talking about kind of why VaultLogix, I don't know how many people are on this call are familiar with us, but the key to talking about who we are and why we'd like to talk about this is that we are an online data backup company. We're a service provider. This is all we do. We do not sell software. We do not sell hardware. We strictly offer backup as a service. We actually have our own proprietary backup technology. As I mentioned before, we've been around since 2002. I've been here for as Melanie mentioned, almost 9 years. I've been here longer than probably most online backup companies have been in business. We do have multiple data centers. The key to this is making sure that, God forbid that, one of the data centers does go down, the data is replicated to a secondary facility. We also have a data center in Toronto to actually support our international customers. We are the exclusive online backup provider for Ingram Micro. For those of you who aren't familiar with Ingram Micro, they're actually the largest distributor of hardware and software in the world. We have over 8,000 business clients, 600 plus resellers that sell our solution, and we also are SOC 2 audited. It used to previously be called SAS 70 Type 2, but we have those as well. And some of this is putting here is talking about it. We're not a fly-by-night. We've been around. We've been stable. We make money. And that's what you really need to ensure is that if you're looking for a provider, if you look at what this business really is about, it's really about digital insurance. And the key to that is, making sure that you trust the person that you're with, that they're going to be around, that they're going to support you when you need it. So kind of tying this up a little bit is really pushing this in towards a little further about our service and how we deliver our service. We call it a business class service or delivery. So what we do is we combine our offsite data protection, as in putting data out to the cloud. We also combine it with a local backup. So it's the people that out there today are looking at cloud and saying, well, that's great. You're backing my data up to the cloud, but when I need to restore data from the cloud, that could take a long time. Well, the nice thing about us is because we're business class, we do allow you to back up data locally as well as getting it offsite so that you can restore your data a lot faster. We do have the ability to do a single install per network. So for some of you that are familiar with some of the tape backup technologies, they do require a plug-in or an agent or things to be put on your machines to back up. We do offer the ability to do that with only installing one agent. There is no additional software required for SQL and Exchange. We can not only do client-based restores, we do have the ability to do web-based restores. Perfect example is, let's say you're the IT guy and you're home, and the CEO calls up and he says, or the CFO calls up and is looking for an Excel spreadsheet that he renamed, he doesn't remember what he did, or he deleted it. Well, you can actually, through the web restore, you can actually go in and restore individual files through the web console and actually email that back to the CFO and the CEO who needs that. We do delta blocking and data compression to increase the backup performance. So once we've backed up the data, what we're doing is we're trying to make sure that the subsequent backups after that are a lot faster, so we can intelligently look at the data, see what's changed, break it down to small sizes, and then compress that and get that offsite so it speeds up the backups. We also have flexible retention schedules. What I mentioned in the best practices piece of the presentation was talking about making sure you have retention policies that might meet business requirements or even compliancy requirements. The nice thing about us and our cloud service is we do have the ability to do many flexible type schedules. Could it be just 5 days, 30 days, your typical grandfather, father, son over a 1 year, 7-year retention? We have that ability. And then, of course, there's no hardware to purchase, no more hardware for you to manage on top of that. So with that being said, hopefully this was educational for everyone who's on the call. But what we'd like to do is open this up to questions for anyone there. Melanie, do you have any questions that's come up, or?
I do, yes. I've actually had a few questions come up at this point as we're talking about moving data into the cloud and some pretty serious systems with Microsoft Dynamics and Exchange. A couple people have asked about the security of backing up to the cloud and how safe it really is.
Well, great question. So, and I can imagine, what we've done over the years that I've been here is that's always the #1 concern that comes up to everyone is security. People are scared. They're like, well, I'm sending it up. Where am I sending it to? What's it going to? The nice thing about using a service like Vaultlogics is, #1, the data is always encrypted. So from a compliancy standpoint, the customer is in control of that encryption key if they wish, and the data is always held in encryption. So, and using government standards as well. But if you take it even a step further from that standpoint, if you look at our data centers, and I mentioned it before, we have multiple data centers that's replicated to other data centers where your data can be housed. But from a security standpoint, well, we're using these data centers are not just, sitting here at our office. We're actually using other level 4 data centers, tier 4 data centers, which is the highest, and making sure that all the data centers are audited and compliant, as well as taking a step further is our company, as I mentioned, has the SOC 2 compliancy. So as a company, we're audited every year to make sure that we're adhering to these rules and procedures. So from a security standpoint, in some cases, it's probably more secure than how some people are backing up their data today.
Great. Now I've gotten a couple other questions about this, and I do have to admit, when I first started, I had similar questions myself. And a couple of people have asked, you see a lot of other providers out there, the Dropboxes, the Amazons of the world. What is the difference between VaultLogix and Amazon, and why would you go with a company like VaultLogix over, say, an Amazon?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, it's funny how when we, the 8+ years I've been here, seeing different competitors come into the market, especially some of the larger ones like an Amazon. But what we've noticed and what we've seen from other providers or the people that have used it, or just from our knowledge base of our competitors, is that there's a difference between cloud storage and cloud backup. Cloud storage is just what it is. It's just a kind of a dumb place to put your just to put storage. Cloud backup, what we do is we make sure that, number one, we have application support. We can back up SQL and Exchange and VMware and SharePoint. But also on the back end, the Amazons, they have this basic consumer class type storage where, their customers aren't the ones that need their data back within 15 minutes. Their customers are, if I get my data back within a week, I'm okay. The difference between that and cloud backup, especially VaultLogix, is we use enterprise class infrastructure. We make sure everything is highly available, and we're not running on just a bunch of disk. We're running on RAID protected, redundant, highly available infrastructure all the way to the back end that gets replicated out to a secondary facility. We talk about 24/7 access to data, 24/7 support we offer, things of that nature which make us a step above those type players.
Great. And I think we have time for, I don't know, would you say one more question?
Sure.
All right. I've gotten some pretty interesting questions coming in, but one I think that's really good, someone asked early on, and I know we've touched on it a little bit, is when we're looking at something like, say, server, Exchange server, or maybe SharePoint, is how the ability to back up not only the overall but down to the document level. Can you just give a little more clarification on how that can be done and that in fact can be done?
Sure. And it really depends on what the need is of the end user. So if you looked at, let's use Exchange as an example, is, first and foremost, the basic requirement is making sure that all the data gets backed up off-site. So if there's a local problem, be it the server, the hardware is dead, the internet's down, or there's a virus in the email itself, you want to be able to store everybody's email. You don't need to worry about individual emails, because in that case it's more of a click, deleted, something else happened. But if you wanted to take it a step further, you do have the ability to break down and back up individual mailboxes at the PST level, so that if Melanie, in marketing, for some reason had gotten a virus or a corruption, or somehow, made a mess of her mailbox, to be able to restore an individual mailbox, or going even further inside there for individual message, is very, very advantageous from especially a time perspective. Because if you're only doing the database level, you would have to restore the entire database and then pull the mailbox out to then either possibly restore the message or insert that back into the Exchange it is today. But really what you're talking about is convenience. You're talking about how much are you willing to spend? Because just like any kind of disaster recovery solution, you can spend a lot of money, you can spend a little money, and where are the places that you need to make sure that the minimal pieces that I'm able to recover to get back up and running. Because the more money you spend, the more granular you can get, the more ability that your downtime is a lot shorter. But the ability, most cloud providers can offer you that ability to go as high level as everything down to a simple level of that individual message. So hopefully that answered the question.
I think it did. Thank you very much. I think that is all we have time for today. I did want to let everybody know that whoever asked a question, if we didn't get to you today, we will be following up, so your questions will be answered by one of our on-staff experts to help you make better decisions for backing up your Microsoft applications. Thank you for attending.
Thanks, everyone.